Hello, you're watching World Talks, where every word matters. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Now, this week, all 32 members of NATO are gathering for an annual summit in the United States. Washington, D.C. will be buzzing with activity and high expectations. Yet, despite the fact the alliance is marking 75 years since its foundation, there are many difficult issues on the agenda. Although NATO members have delivered their own weapons and ordnance to Kiev, the war in Ukraine continues with heavy losses and no end in sight. Despite President Volodymyr Zelensky in attendance, a spot at the table and membership for his nation seems very far away. Now let's discuss more about the summit now with our guest, Jakub Graca, Institute of New Europe.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We have this, well, we'll call it a historic summit, 75 years. Of course, that's an important thing. Now, is this more of a celebration? Is it something else? How do you interpret the summit? What are your expectations out of this?
Oh, the summit, this year's summit is extremely important, but so were the summits in the previous years. This is not just for show. That's for certain. That's not just for show. Many important things and topics are to be resolved and not only discussed, but decisions on many important topics are to be taken by NATO allies. Currently, it's 32 allies after Sweden and Finland joined NATO. When it comes to priorities, the first priority is, of course, deterrence and defense, but it's not the most, as the Secretary General of NATO a couple of days back said, that's the most urgent priority is Ukraine. But, of course, the most important priority for NATO as the alliance is deterrence and defense, because it's task number one for the alliance set in the NATO strategic concept of 2022. So Ukraine is the most important topic for now. Of course, we can. On the one hand, we cannot say for certain what will happen during the summit. But on the other hand, it can be predicted to a large extent what the agenda is. The agenda was laid out by NATO Secretary General a couple of days ago. So we cannot, for example, we cannot expect an invitation to NATO for Ukraine. That's for sure. That's for a fact.
I want to interrupt you on that because we've heard statements, and I think the last few days as well, particularly from, I think, the Ukrainian side, about this irreversible pathway for Ukraine into the alliance. Now, that's not a membership invitation, but I mean, that sounds very, very ironclad, very solid. But is that going to change come November or January when there's a different president in the White House? How irreversible is this? What does that mean in practice?
This sounds very nice, but when we get back to the year 2008 and the Bucharest summit, at the time, Ukraine and Georgia were said to be sooner or later invited to NATO and become members of NATO, but this has not happened thus far. And we can, with a pinch of salt, I would take with a pinch of salt, because the situation in Ukraine is dire. Ukraine is a war-torn country. So we need to be realistic. It is not realistic for now to invite Ukraine to NATO. It is not realistic to say when this will happen. But if NATO does not take certain measures to make it happen, to make it realistic, even in a longer period of time, but to set to lay a groundwork and to set a clear strategy. Because what NATO lacks in terms of Ukraine is strategy. It's not only NATO, but NATO to a large extent reflects the American attitude. So the current administration, U.S. administration, the most important barrier as far as this administration is concerned is its restraint. The Biden administration has done a lot to Ukraine, has done a lot to rally allies around the common goal of supporting Ukraine, but it still lacks a clear strategy to winning this war and to bringing Ukraine to NATO in a set period of time, because NATO is doing a lot. NATO is doing a lot in terms of training, in terms of support, military support, in terms of equipment, and so on and so forth. But Ukraine needs, and that's what Ukraine is open about, has been open about for months and years now, that it needs a clear signal that will be sent both to Ukraine and to Russia, that NATO is dead set on bringing Ukraine to the alliance. So this will not happen. Ukraine will not be invited to NATO. Of course, certain actions will be taken in terms of training, in terms of military support. For example, NATO is expected to take over from the Pentagon the task of coordinating the military support for Ukraine. I mean, the Ramstein, the so-called Ramstein Ukraine Defense Contact Group, is expected to be replaced, we'll see, fully or to a large extent by a NATO framework. This is also part of the so-called Trump-proofing approach, because Europe fears that if Trump is re-elected, which of course may happen, nobody knows what will happen, because one of the main features of Trump's attitude and Trump's administration was its unpredictability.
That's true, but I think also if we look at, I mean, there have been some pretty egregious statements and rhetoric from Donald Trump in the last months, in particular, worrying. I remember when he said that, you know, those members who are not paying what they need into NATO, Russia can do what they will. Now, he's known for that kind of rhetoric, but at the same time, I think if you look for statements, I believe it goes back to around his visit, when he received President Duda in New York. I think it was around April time, where there's actually a tweet he released on Truth Social, and you dig through it, and it does say in the middle of there that, you know, Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine winning is important. So I think there are morsels there. I also want to know more about defense spending, because that's a huge topic. We've been talking about this for a long time, that 2% marker, more and more allies coming up to that point. But then we have certain laggards in there. We have countries that could bring up 2%. Spain, for instance, I think there's a FT article this morning that ran that Spain is actually contributing almost the least amount to defense. Others, including Italy as well, Belgium, Canada as well. So any kind of, I think, breakthroughs at the summit, will that 2% marker finally be something that all of these member states must meet?
Definitely not all members of the NATO alliance are expected to reach that level of 2% anytime soon. As you have pointed out, there are certain laggards, and you have mentioned Spain or Italy, but I would rather refer the discussion to Canada. That is a very important, very interesting case, because Canada constitutes the core of NATO, is part of the Anglo-Saxon world. So such countries as the United States, Canada, Great Britain constitute the core of NATO, and that they have NATO in their mindset, their DNA. So Canada is the most important, I would say, the most interesting laggard, and Canada has, over the past years, Canada has done very little to scale up its defense spending. Nothing is going to happen in this, or at least very little is going to happen in this area anytime soon.
And they lead the battle group in Latvia, so I mean,
yes,
that's important.
They do. That is important. That is an important contribution. But still, Canada can do much more. It's one of the wealthiest countries of the Western Alliance. It's part of the G7 group.
But you could say the same with Italy. I think they're all still falling behind.
Yep. They're lagging behind as well. Spain, as you said. So, the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, who is soon expected to leave his post, he is boasting that for now 23 countries, by the end of this year, 23 countries of NATO will have will have been contributing 2% of their GDP for defense. But we have 32 countries of NATO, so still 9 countries to go. So there will be definitely some pledges on this during this summit, and this is important. This is also important from the point of view of NATO allies who support Biden to announce these pledges to back him up in the election.
But this is going to be an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because I mean, Jakub, we're going to have a new Secretary General. We know who it's going to be.
Yes.
Mr. Rutte from the Netherlands, assuming his post, I believe, in the beginning of October. But if we look at his record, and the Netherlands could never get up to that 2%. I mean, it's going to be hard for him to control and motivate the rest of the allies if he couldn't have done it under his watch. Does that kind of make this 2% target harder to realize with Rutte in charge?
It is. I wouldn't say so. Rutte has. I would say his past, his political past is not. I would say was diverse. I would say it was. It is not unambiguous. Unambiguous. So 10 years ago, or during the 10 years ago, 13 years ago, he used to support negotiations and rapprochement with Russia. Now he's staunchly anti-Russian. So people may change their minds, of course, but we'll see. Rutte is a candidate of compromise. Because the Western countries of NATO would not agree to, let's say, Kaja Kallas, as opposed to the eastern part of the alliance, which would be elated to see such a candidate on the NATO Secretary General post. So this is a compromise candidate. We'll see what happens, but. In my opinion, it is not that the goal of 2% for defense spending is endangered with Rutte in charge. Of course, the eastern part of the alliance probably would expect a better candidate, but it is a candidate of compromise, and I think NATO should start thinking about the next level. For example, 3%. That's what the Polish president Duda is conveying and is communicating. But as the White House has recently communicated, they would rather concentrate on the 2% level to be reached by all NATO members. Than to think about next levels.
Yeah, let's talk about the eastern flank of the alliance. I think we have two very interesting examples. One was already mentioned slightly with Hungary, very much in its own aura of non-cooperation, really. A special arrangement with, I believe, Mr. Stoltenberg not to contribute any aid to Ukraine. Very, some might say, strange system in the alliance forming there, potentially two-tier system. Then we have Poland, as you said, one of the largest contributors to GDP, I think is almost 4%, as you said, one of the top spenders of military expenditure ratio to GDP. What about Poland's role going forward into the summit, into the future? Let's say, is there a louder voice now of Poland? Are we going to expect more of Poland's voice? Also, I mean, strategically it makes sense in terms of where it is in the hub, but what about other decisions being made across NATO? Is Poland going to play a larger role?
Poland is by far, is definitely one of the largest countries of Europe, both in terms of area and in terms of populations, and so it looks like within NATO. It's the largest countries in the eastern flank of NATO. So Poland has played a pivotal role since the war broke out in 2022 in terms of a hub for military equipment flowing into Ukraine, in terms of humanitarian activities. Poland has admitted a few million Ukrainian refugees. So this role is going to be is expected to be held up, what is good in Poland is that although there was a change of government in last year, both the president and the government and the prime minister and his government, who represent opposing political parties and political communities, they declare that and it's not empty declaration in my opinion, because we can see by actions that in terms of they can differ they can differ and argue on many issues, but in terms of security and NATO and so on. So Ukraine, they are
politics different, but yes, unity and defense on the same page.
It's very
interesting, and I think that also will remain.
But Hungary, if you mentioned Hungary as well. This is a very interesting case because Hungary Prime Minister Orban is now expected to come to the NATO summit after visiting Russia and China. So Hungary has not been thus far punished for these actions.
Well,
so
on that note, with Orban in the mix, I'm sure it's going to be a summit that will still have its challenges up ahead. But nevertheless, 75 years, it's a big momentous occasion for NATO and the alliance. Much has happened, and we'll discuss another time. Look, that was really interesting. Jakub Graca there. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks here on TVP World. Stay tuned for more right here. Goodbye.